wanted to kick off this this workshop with talking about 4 things. So I wanted to give a quick intro to what this workshop is about and kind of this working group that David and I have been thinking about in order to help a lot of the teams and the groups work on all the retrieval market things. We're observing a lot of the different kinds of things being built, and there's a lot of knowledge diffusion that needs to happen, and some kind of coordination and planning that might be valuable. And so we are thinking of kind of creating a bit of like a loose, very informal working group that can help all the teams orient. Then I wanted to talk a bit about the retrieval markets vision, just to kind of align everybody on what exactly we're building and so on. I want to give a super fast preview on some of the updates you'll hear about. And the reason I want to kind of very quickly preview a few things is that I want you to kind of page those into your mind, or you cache them, I guess, in your retrieval market minds, to be able to kind of, as you go into various updates, connect some of the dots and start. And so the goal is to kind of help a lot of the knowledge diffusion happen by giving you a slight preview of what's to come. And then I want to talk about decentralized development, because this is one of the key things that's the way that all of us are approaching building the retrieval market, is that we're all developing different kinds of pieces of the systems. We're doing it in a very decentralized way. And that comes with a lot of advantages and disadvantages in terms of, like, again, knowledge diffusion, coordination costs, and whatnot. And so I'd like to kind of use this workshop. I'd like to use this workshop in order to get us to coordinate as well as we can and lean into the advantages of decentralized development. So gonna give super high level kind of objectives here, and don't mean to, everybody's pretty familiar with this, but again, just trying to page this. And the goal of the retrieval market is to build the world's best CDN leveraging Web3 tech. So of course, that's a long road, a long vision. It will take many years to really be able to compete with the cloud CDNs of today. But we can lean into the advantages of Web3 to build something that has a tremendously stronger potential to actually do the content delivery, to solve the content delivery problem. And so this, one of the key things is native content addressing. Everything from the bottom up being content addressed is super, super useful to build a CDN. The ability to lean into crypto incentives enables us to recruit a whole bunch of service providers that are way closer to the users, because they're oftentimes the users themselves. And that's something that many CDNs of today just cannot do. We're also able to use verifiable computation to be able to create markets that can likely optimize the process of delivering content better than a centrally planned structure. And the whole goal is to kind of, if we can do this and we can couple solid markets with really good distributed systems and networking, then we can end up with a CDN that just has certain order of magnitude improvements and certain very key feature components, feature vectors that will make this kind of CDN kind of outperform other CDNs. Now, of course, that again will take many years to realize, and we can start with building the best CDN for Web3, and then from there kind of scale out to other kinds of applications. But that's sort of like the long-term goal. And so in the kind of short to midterm, the kind of narrower goal is, hey, let's just make a worldwide fast and efficient distribution system for IPFS content. There's a lot of IPFS content already in all of the IPFS spinning services and a bunch of IPFS nodes in the Filecoin storage miner sectors and so on. Let's make all of that content broadly available. So great. So David and I were observing there's a lot of groups building different parts of the retrieval market and different thrusts of it. And by the way, forgive me if I missed a group here. I tried to collect a number of logos, but if I missed you, just let me know and I'll add you. And so the goal is to kind of create a loose working group to support the development. And so this might be giving some amount of coordination help, creating some amount of dev support, being able to kind of do design review and knowledge diffusion. So if anybody's running into questions with certain parts of the stack, we can help answer those. Or if people want kind of feedback on their designs or their architectures, we can kind of like fast track that. In some cases, we can also provide funding for various groups, a number of groups that are already getting funding in order to develop a lot of the tech. And one of the things that we want to do out of this is create a kind of community feel as a group building all this stuff together. And so we'll talk about this more later, but we're thinking of things like creating a demo day every 2 weeks, and creating a set of channels and so on with like high SLAs and so on to be able to kind of coordinate better as a group. And kind of the objective for 2021 that we've been kind of kicking around is to build sort of the first production version of the Retrieval Market. And this is a goal that a lot of you already have, and you're already kind of on the path to doing this. And so just concretely, this might mean a network supporting payment channels, and so or potentially a payment channel network around tens of thousands of nodes or devices, maybe be kind of in the order of 1,000 people. And ideally, we really want to hit the kind of sub-second delivery of CIDs worldwide. So this might involve pre-work in kind of loading a CID into this kind of worldwide service, but it should be possible towards the end of the year for a developer or a Filecoin user to say, I want the content behind the CID to be cached in a bunch of places in the world and be able to be delivered in a sub-second way to parties retrieving. And ideally, we would like to also be able to have the beginnings of content redistribution happening already in the network to meet demand. So this means if we have a network that is able to respond to shifting demand for content and the place that starts moving content to certain areas, that would be a really great achievement to hit this year. We might not, and so many of these kind of key results may not be hit, but this is sort of what we're thinking of potentially aiming for. Great. So what is this workshop about? First of all, introducing everybody to each other, make sure that you're aware of each other, start building relationships and so on. Use this time to do a bunch of updates and deep dives into a number of the projects in order to diffuse knowledge. We aim to record a lot of the sessions so that we have them around for people to watch later on and so on. And we really kind of want to have you sort of direct the agenda in the second day to kind of cater to what you want to know more about, the kinds of things that you would like to kind of hear more about or discuss. We'd like to kind of turn those into deep dives or discussions. And we would like to kind of towards the end chart a little bit of the future, and so kind of align on some rough future plans and roadmaps of different groups. Of course, without really a time component here and more of like a versioning component. And hopefully we can leave with some really good ideas on how the working group can unblock and accelerate your team. So David already kind of gave a preview of this. This is today. This might be an outdated screenshot. And here's the second day. You have the doc. So just some quick guidelines. Code of conduct. I think most people are familiar with this because they've been in the Filecoin community for a long time. Hey, really want you to present your work in progress. So don't hold back in discussing work in progress ideas and things in development. The goal is to diffuse the knowledge of where you're headed, but definitely signpost what works today versus what's in progress. So we don't want to create a structure where people are sort of depending on things that don't exist yet. And so we definitely want to diffuse the ideas and diffuse the knowledge of where things are going to go. But teams should be able to kind of already build on the things that are there now. Like almost all other, like almost every kind of Filecoin oriented workshop and so on, and Ethereum and other communities, it's all open source work. It's meant to be open source and so on. And one of the big things that I want to get out of this is blockers. So I'm sure that there's a lot of things that are blocking each one of your teams. And so if you can kind of orient us and tell us like what's blocking you, then we can problem solve against that and help accelerate you. And we kind of wanted to have this workshop be private so that people can feel more comfortable without having to do a lot of prep. But we'll record all the talks and discussions with the hope to publish. But it's totally okay if you prefer not to distribute something that you participate in, and we can definitely cut things out. So don't worry about that. We'll record, and then afterwards you can tell us if you want to keep it or not. Great. Let's jump into vision. So this is probably familiar with to a lot of people, so I won't recap a lot of it, I just kind of want to dive into some more of the details. For folks that are not that familiar, the Filecoin.io explainer kind of goes a little bit into a visualization of what the retrieval market might do. And then there was a prior workshop last July that you can watch, and that kind of has a kind of articulation of the vision. I'll do a super fast recap here, but not a kind of like the larger view. The TLDR is that the internet is a grapevine, and content must flow through very crowded branches all the way to the leaves. And content distribution is about delivering content as close to the user as possible so that we can cut down on the latency. So it's about moving lots of static content to users with ideally sub 10 millisecond delivery. This is what very serious CDNs target. Now, that's of course very hard, but groups are able to do that in especially very crowded cities. And the cloud is basically dividing storage and content delivery. And so there's a whole set of products around storage, and there's a whole set of products around CDNs. So things like S3, Glacier, object storage, and whatnot, it's all about storage. And then CDNs are all about products like CloudFront, Cloudflare, Akamai, and so on. And by the way, note that like content addressing and hash link data structures are amazing here, because it means that you can store all kinds of versions of the content close to the users, and you get kind of the persistent data structure component of it just is so well tuned to the CDN problem. This is kind of like a shot of like CDNs. So in Filecoin, what this means is that if you take a snapshot of a cloud like Google Cloud, which is on the left, and you think of the core data centers and so on, and then kind of the edge caching and whatnot, you can map that straight to storage miners and retrieval miners. The core data centers are the storage miners, and maybe kind of the edge points of presence and whatnot, where you might have a bunch of racks in an ISP or things like that that are close to the user, but not super close. And then you can think of retrieval miners as the CDNs, and potentially even users in homes and kind of in apartment buildings and universities and whatnot. So storage miners and then retrieval miners are much closer to the end consumers of content. This is kind of a graph that I made last year. It's probably outdated by now, but it gives you a sense of kind of where storage miners and retrieval miners might sit. And one of the key components about the retrieval market is that the whole thing has to work off chain. And so it means that all kinds of operations that we might do to reward parties or create mechanisms or register parties or all kinds of things like that need to happen in this kind of off-chain payment sort of style, where there's some pre-work that needs to happen, then parties are able to transact in payment channel networks, and then there's some settlement after the fact. And there's many different kind of potential topologies for how retrieval might work, and many different groups are pursuing different approaches, but you should sort of expect to see eventually many of these things yielding networks like this, where there are groups of devices that communicate a lot to each other and distribute content to each other, and sort of form regions or the equivalent of regions as kind of mapping to where users actually are and where content wants to be delivered. It'd be amazing to end up with something that is fluid and can subdivide on its own. So think of it kind of like Voronoi style segmentation, where as the load in one region gets too high, then parties could subdivide into smaller and smaller regions. There's like 3 scale numbers that I think are really, really useful to keep in mind. Again, latency in the best case is 1 to 10 milliseconds. That's very aggressive. Nothing in the blockchain world right now works like that. So we're, I think even hitting 100 milliseconds is already really good, and like that might be like a really great target for 2021. But really getting down to sub 10 milliseconds is where very serious CDNs live. Now, number of objects. So this is where it gets pretty crazy. And so this is both for storage and for retrieval. If you want to provide a CDN and a storage system for the applications of the world, you have to be able to deal with something to the tune of like 10 to the 18 objects, which is a lot of objects. This is like when you start kind of, if you do a back of the envelope calculation of things like Twitter and YouTube and other kinds of social networks, and all of the things you have random access to in the web that you want to be able to retrieve and retrieve quickly, you end up with something like this. Now, you don't necessarily need to provide random access to every single object like that, and so there's some grouping that you might be able to do, but you are likely only going to shave 3 or maybe 4 orders of magnitude. At the end of the day, most cloud systems do provide this kind of retrieval. And of course, they use all kinds of like lookup trees and so on to achieve this. And then in terms of the number of retrieval miners, we should think of it in the low end of the beginning, in the low thousands, which we should think of this potentially scaling to hundreds of thousands, or kind of on the upper end, like 10 million. 10 million seems like a really large number. It could be bigger, who knows, especially if people start embedding little retrieval miner scripts and so on into pages. And so that could, of course, go to hundreds of millions or billions. But I would imagine the bulk of the work being done by sub 10,000 or maybe 100,000 parties. You can think of the users as segmenting into these 2 categories, clients and miners. And there's kind of 2 sets for each one of these. In the client side, you have the retrieval end users. These are the people using applications actually consuming the content. And they usually don't want to pay for content. So this is one of the key components of retrieval that needs to be sort of worked out. And then there's the apps and system developers, who are the people building applications that want to deliver the content to the retrieval end users. And they're usually the ones comfortable paying because they want their content to be viewed. And they have some other business model by which they charge. Now, of course, this could be shifted. And there are definitely cases where content gets bigger, where the retrieval end users end up paying. But that's definitely not the norm for the bulk of the content on the network. So a payment mechanism that allows app system developers to pay for the retrievals of end users needs to sort of exist. And then on the miner side, you can think of retrieval miners as the people providing the content for pay. So these are, cloud of parties all over the world that are helping store, cache some content and deliver it to the retrieval end users. And then you can think of like a set of ancillary miners or other service providers that are assisting the retrieval miners in this process. And so this might be the storage miners themselves in kind of being the root provider of the content. These could be indexers that help track the content. So you can think of the IPFS DHT or the DHT that the Pegasus team is proposing as a version of this, or the indexers that are coming from the Lotus team in kind of indexing the content within storage miners and whatnot. So those, you can think of those services as a set of components that need to exist in order to assist the retrieval miners. You can also think of other kinds of hub-like entities, like textile hubs or other kind of payment channel hubs or other systems like this that become sort of watering holes for both clients and miners and retrieval miners to meet around some content that has some locality to it. So a totally valid version of the story here is to have a bunch of hubs that don't even allow service providing across them, but then eventually get wired up in the future. All right, so one of the things that makes the vision for the retrieval market in Filecoin pretty interesting and high potential for kind of like changing the CDNs of the world is that we have, like I mentioned it earlier, but we have a bunch of really fancy tools and technology that just provides some kind of unfair advantages. First of all, having authenticated content that is secure, gives you dedupe and caching basically for free, is super useful and valuable for this use case. Being able to do peer-to-peer resource sharing, where you have a permissionless entry to providing services. So the classic Filecoin story or Bitcoin or Ethereum, where any party can run a node and then start providing the service. That enables access to a whole set of hardware that is just not accessible to current CDN providers. And the ability to do mechanism design with assets and so on, like, it's just again an amazing unfair advantage because it enables you to use markets. And then we can think of all the standard blockchain type tooling like this, so tokens, payment channels, networks, economic mechanisms, and so on. And so using all of these, we can create this kind of open service that can be very robust, and that ideally doesn't even require a kind of any sort of normal management, production service management tooling to kind of keep the whole thing up. So let's think about some of the components that go into the retrieval market in Filecoin. So at the bottom, there's all of the IPLD stuff. So CIDs, hash-linked data structures, and so on. Like this is the kind of the meat of the data structure components. Then the fact that we have libp2p and the peer-to-peer networking layer is really useful because it gives us this runtime freedom where we can embed libp2p in a bunch of different deployment scenarios. So it can go in the browser, it can go in backends, it can go can even go across things like Bluetooth and so on. You can enable it across even onion routing and so on. And it makes it easy to swap out certain things like, it ended up being that swapping the congestion control was like an advantage for certain CDN providers, where like swapping from like normal TCP congestion control to BBR was like a leg up. It gave some CDNs a leg up in their throughput. And so us being able to do that is a significant advantage. Then of course, the staple UNIXFS file system is needed to kind of model what most people end up using CDNs for. And so all of that kind of packaged together in IPFS with kind of the data transfer component gives you the ability to kind of move all this static content around. And then from there, we kind of build up with other components like Gossip Sub, which gives you some ability to coordinate a set of parties through some pub sub layer. Then we have ways of forming collections, things like textile threads and buckets and other kind of collection groupings. This might inform a lot of content that gets co-located either with hubs or other kinds of components. And then we have a bunch of components like regular IPFS nodes and the IPFS gateway and Brave and so on, which would be consumers of the retrieval market. And in some cases, these parties may pay directly, or in some cases, they might not pay and instead be subsidized by the app providers. Or in the case of the IPFS gateway, PL can help subsidize the retrievals through the gateway. Then we have Filecoin and the token for payments. And of course, there's possibilities of doing like ERC20s and so on for all their kind of components if it becomes important and useful to isolate some of the activity. And then you can do things like, and then you can think of the storage market and IPFS spinning services as having the long-term storage and having all the content that becomes the source of material for the retrieval market. Then we can think of Filecoin payment channels and state channels and other kind of tooling to provide the routing network to do the fast payments. At the moment, most parties are just trying to get it working without payment channels, and like that's great. Like let's just get fast delivery working for free, and then kind of add in payment channels after. That seems like a great way. And of course, we have the EVM to do any kind of more complex smart contracts and mechanisms. And so this from going, you can deploy contracts to Ethereum or other networks, and eventually later on, Filecoin will end up having the EVM as well. And so at that point, being able to kind of deploy some of the contracts into Filecoin will help not have to do a bunch of things through bridges. And then then there are other components like these indexing nodes that are emerging. So there's different types of services and side services that might emerge here, and we'll need some way of coordinating these. The structure from the proposal from Pegasus has like this nice registry component where you have like some place to meet each other and find other kind of service providers, and that becomes like a kind of like a first entry point to have some index of service providers, and then from there jump to different kind of components. And then one more thing that is super useful and valuable is the fill mining reserve. So the fill mining reserve is a big capital pool allocated for many types of mining, including retrieval market incentives. And so that can be a very valuable way of incentivizing and subsidizing a lot of the retrieval market activity. Now, of course, that needs a very good economic design because incentives like that are double-edged swords for sure. And we are also seeing the emergence of reputation systems that are starting to track the activity of various miners and certain kinds of quality like uptime and retrieval speed and jurisdiction and all kinds of other features. You can imagine that extending to things like HIPAA compliance and whatnot. And so those kinds of features are getting tracked and measured by these emerging reputation systems that you'll hear about. And you can, there's probably stuff that I'm forgetting. It's a lot already, and there's probably going to be more. And so one of the big things about this workshop is helping everybody navigate this like soup of stuff and understand what it all is and how it fits and how it relates and so on, will be important in an ongoing basis. So kind of the approach that I would suggest to everybody is to kind of follow this path of kind of 3 steps. First and foremost, building a kind of typical CDN product experience for clients. So this means learn from CDN markets and the design and the product design of those CDNs and aim to meet the expectations of users. So this means actually look at and study the exact product structures that users expect already and meet users where users are. Don't try and like shift the behavior of developers and so on too much. They're already going to have to be shifted in terms of dealing with crypto and whatnot. But that's sort of like the long-term goal. We might not get there this year because this year it might just be about Web3, and that's totally fine. But for this product to be really successful in the long term, you need to be able to appeal to parties that have no idea about Web3 or crypto or anything like that. And here, there are 2 user experiences that are absolutely key. One is the end user retrieval is by far first and foremost most important thing. That's the product. So the product is really fast delivery of content to the user. So a user page load, seeing something and not waiting and immediately having a very smooth experience. That's at the end of the day, the product. A very good example of this is like go use one of the modern social networks that are maybe video oriented. So things like Instagram or TikTok and things like that. And you can feel the app just very smoothly delivering very high quality video to you, or Netflix, things like that. That is like a very good CDN powering that entire structure. And like, that's the product. Then the second UX is the developers. They have to have a very smooth and easy way of mapping what they're doing today to this new CDN experience. And so finding ways of removing complexity that comes from the Web3 world to try and give developers something they're familiar with will also be important, but secondary to the end user retrieval. So then after that, after kind of aiming to deliver that well, step 2 is really kind of building a profitable and easy to run retrieval mining software. So this means there's another set of users, which is the retrieval miners, that need to download some software and some product and run it. And for them, it needs to be, most of these miners are not going to be running very large scale operations. They're going to be very different from kind of like the large storage miners. There'll usually be individuals or maybe a small group. They'll have small deployments, either one computer or a rack, like a small rack. And they're not going to be able to spend a lot of time and labor managing these things. So then the UX of that product and the reliability of that product become really important. So you want kind of high quality consumer product UX here, where people should be able to download the thing with clicks, double click to run the thing, and then have it just run in the background. And of course, the economic flows must be profitable. So otherwise the retrieval miners won't do it. And especially in the early days, as the network is getting going, there needs to be very high margins. Otherwise, people won't get over the hump of doing this. Now, of course, once the network is in large scale operation, those margins will likely get competed away to some degree, and that'll be fine. But in areas where maybe there's no retrieval miners yet, then there might still be kind of like high margins. Like imagine a new city that has no retrieval miners, that there might be like a strong margin to be had there. Again, subsidies could be very powerful here, but they are a double-edged sword. So finding good economic structures to do this is really key. And kind of like step 3, which really is kind of where we are today. So we're sort of starting with 3 and working our way to like the most important thing, which is number 1, is to wire components, all of these different components that we're talking about, into those good products. And kind of my advice here would be try and keep the architectures of the systems and the products themselves nimble and evolving. So think of compartmentalizing components that are loosely coupled, so that as the ecosystem evolves, as other teams build new things and so on, we can all adapt pretty quickly. So this was a big learning from the DeFi world where, and of course, before that, Node and Unix and many other communities, if you can keep kind of the broader architecture of the thing nimble and evolving quickly, then you can boil down to get the right primitives and the right components, and kind of enable really fast system evolution. Great. So that's it on those components. I'll give you kind of, again, a super rapid fire set of updates. And then just to kind of prime your mind, you'll hear a lot. So don't be worried if you don't fully get one of these things or why it matters. You'll hear more about it either today or in the next couple of days. So many of you have seen these reputation systems that have been developing. Here's one example, the textile miner index, which is a way of looking at a whole set of properties for miners and kind of being able to judge them, which is really, really useful in order to select good miners. There's another one, Filecoin, that launched recently as well. It's a different set of features and a different set of measurements and so on. It's really, really useful to have these different sets of deal bots that can track and test all kinds of features. And imagine this being kind of a market of many different groups will come up with different things to test. And I sort of expect things like, again, HIPAA compliance or other kinds of critical security things fitting in here. Then there's the POC one from Pegasus, which is booting up the retrieval gateways, and later on is going to be adding a DHT that's meant to be incentivized with staking, and that's getting off the ground and has like that registry where you can kind of register the various different parties, and it's kind of like having a lot of the components already going. And then there's a single hop DHT, which tries to eliminate the, I think it's not built yet, it's coming in the future. This is really tries to eliminate the need for a bunch of connections set up. And so ideally you can kind of find exactly which parties to go to. And, you know, an incentivized DHT makes a ton of sense. And we've thought about this for a long time. Like, I think you do need both a world where there's some kind of fully free alternative for a set of use cases, but an incentivized DHT with a low number of nodes that are, you know, a highly professionalized service makes a ton of sense. There's the update from the RETMKT looking at a bunch of different areas in Filecoin deal success and kind of addressing a bunch of problems there, and you'll get an update on how that's going. I think I sort of sent the talk earlier today, and you can kind of watch that async, I think. There's a set of architecture changes and kind of reframings. It's more of a reframe than a ton of change, and maybe addition of new systems. That's really, really key. And this is coming out of like really, really great work in the last few weeks, kind of boiling down some set of interfaces, identifying new components and new systems. So there's some space for the network indexers, space for the reputation systems, space for the DL bots or miner audits. And this picture really kind of brings it all together in a very, very good way. And it also shows, you know, things like Lotus, Go IPFS, and JS IPFS is all different types of IPFS nodes. And you can think of like, and you know, notably, the IPFS gateway is pulling content out of the Filecoin miner. How is that going to work? And so on. Then there are updates around kind of architectural changes around separating out processes and for important security constraints. We'll hear about indexing and some proposals there around how to index all the content within Filecoin miners and large IPFS spinning services. We'll hear more about the indexer interface. We'll also get to hear a formulation of the retrieval market and decomposition of all of the components and the and laid out in a set of milestones. It's kind of like an overview based on all the different components that are coming together that can be super, super useful for a number of groups. And then we have things like these reputation services and some aggregation infrastructure that is going to be added in so that we can get verifiability added to the deal bots and the reputation measurement. And then we can create a space where tools can leverage these reputation systems to make decisions about which miners to recommend. there's some interesting kind of developments in the user-defined smart contracts world. A lot of people want to add a bunch of actors into Filecoin, and because we didn't ship with the EVM as we had originally planned way back, and kind of like punted that, this is now coming up again, and a number of groups want to push for this. We'll see when this happens. It's not clear when it might happen, but hopefully it'd be really awesome if the retrieval markets work and kind of maybe help accelerate this. There's also really cool work happening around bridges and storage oracles or storacles, where you can kind of have a Filecoin style contract in other chains that virtualizes some of the Filecoin activity, so you can store and so on from there, can form deals. But you can also start doing some other very interesting things, like create economic structures that that value things differently and whatnot. There's a bunch of thoughts going into starting to kind of see the marriage of DeFi and storage. Great. So hopefully I didn't fry any brains with that, because there's a lot of stuff there and you'll hear a lot more later. But hopefully that quick overview helped just prime your mind with a bunch of the different things that are going to come together, so that as you see each update that's going to happen, it will kind of make more sense in context of what's to come later. Great. So decentralized development. There's a ton of advantages to decentralized development and some challenges. And so I try to kind of map a few of the ones that I think are really key here. So one massive advantage, we have many teams and many orgs exploring the space. There's more of us, so we can get a lot more done in parallel. We can run a bunch of experiments and kind of have a market of approaches to see what's going to work. We don't know what's going to end up being successful, so it's very good to have different teams trying different things. And we have shared goals and objectives, and so as a group, we're kind of aiming towards roughly the same set of things. And as a kind of team of teams, we have much greater knowledge span as a group than kind of any one group. And of course, this kind of being in a decentralized development space makes it much easier for us to sort of recruit entire teams of people to help us solve specific problems. So like if we find some problem there where we would like to kind of recruit an entire team to go and solve that, like that's available to us. Now the challenge is though, it means coordination complexity, not just across one team and so on, how it works, but now you have coordination complexity across many different organizations with different norms. You cannot really accelerate sequential things. You can do more in parallel, but you're not gonna just speed up sequential work. You might end up with a bunch of duplicated work because those different experiments tried different things, and you end up with like bizarre versions of the same things, and that might be just a wasted time for people. And so this is where the knowledge diffusion and understanding what other people are doing can become really useful, because that way you can decide whether or not you want to try a different approach, or it's a bad thing if you like go and build the thing and weeks later or months later you're like, oh wow, somebody else had built like the exact same thing at the exact same time, and it's almost the same and I could have used the thing. And the kind of like differences in teams yields different weekly priorities in a sense, and so that might yield kind of frustrating blockages where something ends up being really important for one group in order to be unblocked to keep going, but that just isn't that important to that other group. And so we need some good way of propagating priorities here to help people move quickly. That, I think, by the way, is the biggest problem with decentralized development, and I've seen it plague all kinds of open source projects for years. And then though we have a much larger knowledge span, the diffusion is slower because we sync less and whatnot. So we have a lot more progress, but it's more chaotic and way less linear. And so we'll have to kind of be comfortable with some of these challenges and try to mitigate their damage, but at the same time, try to lean into the advantages. So lean into the many experiment stands, lean into systems designs that incorporate composability, loosely coupled systems and whatnot. So hopefully this kind of like loose working group can play a useful role to amplify the advantages and dampen the challenges. So help support teams and coordinate, help motivate towards concrete goals. And potentially some like light synchronization could help here, and it's very kind of opt-in. If it's useful to you, great. If not, give us feedback. We'll try something else. And if it's not useful at all, then don't do it. But we are thinking of doing something around gathering some high-level plans and roadmaps from groups, at least in terms of features, not necessarily time, because time is very uncertain right now. David and I are very strong believers in demos, and so if we have like a demo cadence of demos every 2 weeks or something, could be really useful to kind of help diffuse knowledge. We thought that we would provide office hours for folks to book whenever they want, and we were very able to offer our own time, but not sure if we can offer other people's. Please, if you can, consider adding some kind of like office hour schedule. So if other people can book you and chat for 15 minutes alone, that might be really valuable. And we're still thinking through how to prioritize blocking requests, but we'll try to come up with something here. And then we thought it would be useful to have, so it's been very valuable for the Web3 dev team at PL to have this kind of like engineering product design reviews. It's been super useful to diffuse knowledge. And so we're wondering if we can borrow some of that and try to do something like that with a set of folks here where maybe there's a group of us that can help review certain designs by different teams and provide feedback along the way. Again, only if it's useful. It's like a, hey, if this useful to you, do it. So now some recommendations that I would give every team here. Really aim for decoupling and refining composable primitives. So learn from the composable platform. So Unix is the most famous one, Node as well, and DeFi, and of course there's many more, but these kind of like loosely coupled systems that do like one thing really well, and then enable other groups to kind of recompose those things and use them in different ways. So things like a good example of this is the indexers that I was describing earlier. Those Will and others work to decouple a lot from Filecoin itself, and they're now like pretty generic, and they can work for any IPFS thing. So maybe they're just IPFS indexers, and really lean to that composability, because that composability, which you sort of require a certain level of simplicity to earn that composability. That simplicity itself will make it easier for people to learn and understand what the component is. It'll make it easier to build and maintain components. It'll enable prioritization because more teams can contribute to kind of like well-defined smaller things. And it'll also enable a lot of experimentation. Again, some of the most successful things in the DeFi world in the last couple of years came from the very smooth composability. So if we ended up with things in the retrieval markets where certain kind of structures are really easy for some team to come by and like compose into something else and try it out and see if it works, some new mechanisms, a new economic structure, something like that, that might be really valuable. And I really think that this simplicity and composability enables teams of people to find the right actual primitives faster, because you boil things down, you try a few things, and then you throw some away, and you kind of keep what really is useful to people. So here's an example of a set of composable primitives that we already have somewhere in the stack. And there's a bunch more that are being sort of developed right now in different ways. And by the way, this is like probably 20%. I just off the top of my head, I listed a few just to kind of prove the point. But just think of, as we go into doing things, think of creating these composable primitives. So maybe the incentivized DHT from the Pegasus team might be its own component that could be reused for a lot of things, not just the retrieval market. And yeah, I think kind of getting into a cadence of building, shipping, and demoing, I think will help all of us have like this low amount of time bandwidth, but really high quality way of seeing what other teams are doing and kind of update quickly on what others are doing to kind of know how to reorient what we're doing to play well with what other groups are making. Now, I will advise against coordinating roadmaps to some extent, meaning the moment where there's like multiplicative risk of one team is building a thing that another team is waiting for, that another team is waiting for, that another team is waiting for, like that is just a recipe for that thing is not going to ship for years. And so like really recommend kind of detangling things as much as possible, going for composition, know what people are making, and so don't necessarily duplicate things, but kind of maybe bound that risk is always a trade-off. Great, so that's it. Sorry for blathering you for 50 minutes, but I thought it was important and valuable to kind of go through all that. Now I'm gonna go through questions really quickly.
Fantastic. I actually captured the
runs out.
questions into the document one to make it easier for you.
Awesome.
So actually, we had a bunch of technical questions as you were presenting, which I believe will be answered through other sessions. So we could like answer those, or if other people have more questions about what Juan presented about the Retrieval Market Working Group or the plans, or if anyone wants to bring a question on that. All right, I don't see any, so let's go to the technical. Starting from the bottom. So interested in discussing tools towards search and indexing of Filecoin content, especially before it's committed to be sealed into a Filecoin sector. Imagine a Dropbox for private content or Google for IPFS for public content replacement. Making peer-to-peer content searchable will be imperative for increasing its utility. Any comments on that?
So to that, that's the indexing tooling that I was describing earlier. You'll hear more about it, I think, in a couple of days. And there is a talk that I linked that also has a description of it. I can find it for you, but the gist is, yeah, that tool is going to index the payload, the car payload of the sector before it's sealed, and basically help miners provide retrieval to any CID that they have. Now, any CID asterisk, there's a lot of CIDs, so there's some kind of filter there that needs to apply. You'll hear more from Raul and Will on that. But ideally, it's like as close to every CID as we can.
All right, thank you so much, Juan. Let's go to the next one because I think we have time to cover all of them. Any thoughts towards privacy and encryption of data stored in Filecoin, or towards levels of encryption, secret key, shared keys, end-to-end encryption, double redshift encryption, key custody, key management, Web3, IAM?
Yeah, totally. So this is where the client applications right now need to do the heavy lifting. We should be able to make it easier to do this. So finding really solid primitives to do this. I believe that textile buckets already do this for you, or they're going to. Don't quote me on they absolutely do it, but I remember it being part of the product direction. And there are other kind of developer tools that are strongly orienting towards solving that at the IPLD layer. So ideally, we would solve the encryption questions with encrypted versions of the IPLD data structures. And then all of the ciphertext just get lumped into Filecoin. Now there's a whole separate set of things, which is reader-writer privacy. That is way bigger, way harder, because we know how to do encryption of content. What we don't know how to do well is reader-writer privacy. And short of a full oblivious routing thing, most approaches don't work super well. There are some good proxy approaches that can work well, and maybe this might be a good discussion topic. But this is totally a thing that we should care about, especially for CDN of content. So CDNs of content, that's exactly what things like social networks need, and social networks and other kind of media distribution systems. That's the kind of thing that you would want to if you want to know what some group is thinking or viewing. That's what you would try to track. And so even though the content is encrypted, you might be able to know which users are requesting what. And so that's the kind of thing that we need drastic improvement into all of these systems around establishing very good reader-writer privacy. Right now, I don't know that any group here is working on that, but super interested in helping groups go for it and try to solve those questions. And so if there's any group that wants to work on it, we can help fund or help support.
Thank you so much, Juan. We just got a new question from Pooja. Tactical question about recommendations, best practices for coordinating between groups. What comms channels, public roadmaps, or shared Google, Notion, etc., where we can share plans with each other?
Yeah, so this is what I'd like to resolve in the next couple of days, to just get a little bit of feedback from the group on what will work for people. Because David and I are very hesitant to just come up with some process and throw it at people, and people be like, well, what the hell is this? We don't want this. and so the last thing we want is to overprocess something that does not want to process. However, we seek to get people's feedback on what would be like very light touch way of providing this coordination. And so the easy things to reach for might be, hey, a Slack channel is helpful. Hey, some way where we can describe the tracks of, we can visually see the roadmap of what people are working on and their milestones or their versions that they expect to ship, like the very coarse, many month ones, that might be useful. We probably don't need it to be more granular than that. Some index of all the different things that are going on might be useful and valuable to keep updated. And then some of the, and then trying to do kind of feedback and reviews and office hours and demos to then allow the subset of teams that want to talk about something to do so without kind of DOSing everybody else.
Great answer, thank you. Okay, so we have 3 minutes and we have one more question, which was actually the first. How do retrieval markets integrate with IPFS pinning servers? Would you imagine retrieval miners would also include a pinning service that compensates them via payment channels?
Yeah, so it could work. So I mean, retrieval miners could be pulling from pinning services, just like any other, just like a Filecoin storage miner or any other party. If it's useful to the pinning service and if it's useful to the retrieval miner and to the end user, there's very much a market question there. So like, what's the utility? But if there's utility to be had there, then yeah, totally IPFS pinning services could totally use the retrieval market without having to go through the storage market, because it's just CIDs, right? So this is the composability thing. The things going through the retrieval market do not need to be coming from Filecoin storage seals. They could just be any CID, and if they're any CID, then any IPFS pinning service or any IPFS node could hire a retrieval miner to do this. I see. So the question is more around, hey, could pinning services instead be retrieval miners? Yeah. So one of the things that I showed was this diagram with the access patterns for the storage miners and retrieval miners, and I sort of hinted at the fact that pinning services are actually very close to being very good retrieval miners. And so, yeah, I think that retrieval mining might be a profitable endeavor for pinning services. But it kind of remains to be seen, meaning like they already have a solid business model. The retrieval mining business model might not be good enough for them, or it might. It maybe depends on the economic mechanisms at that point.